Please tell me you are not my date. Daniel Parker stopped 3 steps inside the restaurant, one hand still resting on the brass door handle, his dark brown hair damp from the cold Chicago drizzle outside. Across the softly lit dining room, Madison Reed looked up from a corner table and froze. For 8 years, Daniel had worked at Reed Technologies without once imagining he would see its billionaire chief executive officer waiting beneath amber lights with 2 dinner menus and an empty chair across from her. At 32, Daniel knew how to repair cooling systems, diagnose electrical failures, and raise a 7-year-old daughter alone. None of those skills explained what to do when your boss appeared at your blind date. Daniel, Madison said. He considered leaving. Miss Reed. Do not what? Call me Miss Reed. She glanced around the restaurant, lowered her voice, and delivered the sentence that made his entire evening stop. I am your blind date. Daniel stared at her. No. Madison blinked. That is a surprisingly confident response. My sister said I was meeting someone named Maddie. My friend said I was meeting someone named Dan. Daniel. Madison. They looked at each other, then at the table, then back at each other. Somewhere near the bar, silverware clicked against porcelain while an old jazz song played softly beneath the murmur of Friday night conversations. Daniel finally exhaled. This has to be a setup. If it is, I was not informed. You are the chief executive officer of the company where I work. I am aware. That makes one of us comfortable with this situation. A reluctant smile touched Madison's face. Daniel had never seen that smile at headquarters. At work, she moved through glass conference rooms with controlled precision, golden blonde hair immaculate, decisions already made before most people finished explaining the problem. Tonight, in an elegant dark dress, she looked less like the woman whose name appeared on the building and more like someone equally trapped by an unfortunate coincidence. Daniel reached for the door again. I should go. Probably. He paused. She paused. Neither moved. Madison glanced at the untouched glass of water across from her. The reservation is prepaid. Of course it is. My friend believes commitment begins with financial inconvenience. Daniel almost laughed. My sister believes being single for 4 years qualifies as a medical emergency. That earned a real laugh from Madison, warm and unexpectedly ordinary. Daniel turned back toward her. For the first time, the woman he had spent years avoiding on the executive floor did not seem intimidating. She seemed nervous. That somehow made everything worse. 20 minutes, Madison said. What? We sit down for 20 minutes. We eat something. We agree our friends are terrible people. Then we leave and pretend this never happened. Daniel studied her. 3 rules. I am listening. No work. Agreed. No money. Madison raised an eyebrow. That one feels specifically aimed at me. And no second date. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Agreed. Daniel finally sat across from her. The chair creaked softly beneath him. Madison folded her hands on the table. For several seconds, neither knew what to say without job titles standing between them. Then Daniel's phone lit up beside his plate. A message from Lucy appeared on the screen. Daddy, do not be boring. Madison saw only the smile that crossed his face. Someone important? She asked. Daniel turned the phone face down. The most important person in my life. Something changed in Madison's expression. Your daughter. Daniel looked up sharply. How did you know I have a daughter? Madison went still. She had known his name before tonight for a reason Daniel had never imagined. And suddenly their accidental blind date was carrying a secret neither of them was ready to explain. 48 hours earlier, Daniel Parker had been standing barefoot in his kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, spreading peanut butter across 2 slices of toast, while his 7-year-old daughter watched him with the suspicious expression of a detective who had already solved the case. You forgot something. Daniel glanced at the lunchbox beside her. Apple slices, sandwich, crackers, water bottle. I forgot nothing. Lucy pointed at the refrigerator. A yellow sticky note waited beneath a magnet shaped like a pizza slice. Friday, 7:30. Where's something nice? Daniel sighed. That is not something I forgot. That is something I am actively ignoring. Lucy grinned. Aunt Rebecca said you would say that. Your aunt talks too much. She says you work too much. Daniel closed the lunchbox. Your aunt definitely talks too much. Morning light filtered through the blinds of their modest Chicago apartment, catching the steam above his coffee and the collection of Lucy's drawings taped across the refrigerator. Daniel had learned to build a life from routines. Breakfast at 6:15. School drop-off at 7:20. Read Technologies by 8. Home whenever the building stopped finding new things for him to repair. Predictability was not exciting, but after losing his wife, Anna, for years earlier, Daniel had stopped asking life to be exciting. He wanted safe. He wanted steady. Most of all, he wanted Lucy to never wonder whether her father would come home. Dad, what? What if she is nice? Daniel looked at the sticky note again. Rebecca had arranged the blind date through a friend of a friend and refused to provide anything beyond a first name. Maddie, 28, single, works in business. Daniel had laughed when Rebecca called that sufficient information. Nice would already be complicated, he said. Lucy frowned. Why? Daniel knelt and zipped her coat. Because sometimes people come into your life, and you start making room for them. That sounds good. Sometimes it is. He smiled, but his eyes carried the part he did not say. Making room meant accepting that someone could leave. By 8:10, Daniel was beneath the white lights of Reed Technologies headquarters, wearing work boots and a Navy facilities jacket with his identification badge clipped to the chest. He was a senior facilities engineer, the man people called when conference rooms overheated, backup systems failed diagnostics, or executives discovered that glass buildings still depended on ordinary pipes and wires. Daniel liked the work because machines were honest. A broken system did not care about status. It simply needed someone patient enough to understand what was wrong. At 10:30, his supervisor handed him a tablet. Executive floor. Conference room cooling issue. Daniel immediately handed it back. Send Marcus. His supervisor stared at him. You are the senior engineer. Marcus needs experience. You avoid that floor like it charges admission. Daniel picked up his toolbox. I avoid unnecessary complications. Everyone at headquarters knew Madison Reed. Youngest chief executive officer in the company's history. Brilliant. Controlled. Almost impossible to read. Daniel had once watched an employee leave a meeting with her carrying a cardboard box before lunch. He never learned the full story, but the image stayed with him. He had a daughter, a mortgage-sized pile of ordinary expenses, and no interest in becoming memorable to powerful people. He took the service elevator instead. As the doors began closing, a woman's hand stopped them. Madison Reed stepped inside. Daniel straightened. Good morning, Miss Reed. Her blue eyes moved to his badge, then to his face. Daniel Parker. He blinked. She already knew his name. Madison stepped out 3 floors later without explanation, leaving Daniel alone with the quiet hum of the elevator and one uncomfortable question. Why would the chief executive officer know exactly who he was? Madison Reed had known Daniel Parker's name for 11 months, but not for the reason he feared. The morning after their elevator encounter, she stood beside the windows of her 32nd floor office while Chicago disappeared beneath a pale winter sky. Behind her, her closest friend, Jenna Collins, dropped a restaurant confirmation onto the desk. Tomorrow night, 7:30. You are going. Madison did not turn around. I run a company with 4,000 employees. I can decline dinner. You have declined 12 dinners, 3 charity galas, 2 vacations, and every man I have introduced you to since college. That sounds efficient. It sounds lonely. Madison finally faced her. At 28, she had become practiced at letting silence end conversations. Investors called it discipline. Employees called it intimidating. Jenna called it hiding. His name is Dan, Jenna continued. 32. Single father. Steady job. His sister says he is kind, responsible, and completely terrible at dating. Madison raised an eyebrow. His sister actually said that? With enthusiasm. Does he know who I am? He knows you are Maddie, 28, and work in business. That is technically true. Exactly. Madison almost refused again, but her eyes drifted toward a framed photograph on the shelf behind her desk. Her late mother stood beside a much younger Madison at a neighborhood science fair, both laughing beneath a crooked paper sign. Beside the photograph rested a small wooden music box Madison had not opened in years. On its underside, nearly hidden by age, were 2 carved initials. A. P. Jenna noticed where she was looking. Your mother wanted you to have a life outside this building. Madison looked away. 7:30? 7:30. 1 dinner. That is all I am asking. After Jenna left, Madison opened a personnel file on her tablet. Daniel Parker, Senior Facilities Engineer. 8 years with Reed Technologies. Consistently excellent evaluations. No disciplinary issues. Emergency contact, Rebecca Parker. Dependent, Lucy Parker. Madison had first noticed his name nearly a year earlier when a facilities report crossed her desk after a winter power failure. Daniel had remained at headquarters for 16 hours coordinating backup systems, while refusing overtime credit for hours another technician had worked. His supervisor had written one sentence in the report: Parker takes responsibility when nobody is watching. Madison remembered that sentence. She remembered the name. What she did not know was that Dan from Jenna's Blind Date and Daniel Parker from Reed Technologies were the same man. Friday evening proved otherwise. Now, seated across from him at the restaurant, Madison realized her innocent answer had created the wrong question. Your daughter? Daniel asked again. How did you know I have a daughter? Madison set down her water glass. Because I knew your name before tonight. Daniel's expression tightened. That is not reassuring. You were mentioned in an internal facilities report last year. You remember employees from facilities reports? I remember character. He studied her carefully. So this was arranged? No. Jenna told me I was meeting a man named Dan. I swear I did not know it was you. Daniel leaned back. That is either comforting or somehow worse. Madison smiled. I have not decided either. The server arrived, interrupting them just long enough for the tension to soften. When they were alone again, Daniel glanced at the clock. Their 20 minutes were nearly gone. Neither moved. Then Madison's phone lit up with a message from Jenna. She ignored it, but Daniel noticed something else when she turned the phone face down. Her lock screen showed the same old science fair photograph from her office. In the corner stood Madison's mother beside a man whose face was partly hidden by a banner. Daniel went completely still. He knew that jacket. He knew that posture. He had seen the man in photographs from his childhood. Madison, he said quietly, who is standing beside your mother? She looked at the screen. An old family friend. What? Daniel slowly shook his head. No reason. But for the second time in 2 days, someone at Reed Technologies was hiding recognition. And neither Daniel nor Madison yet understood that their blind date had been accidental, while the connection between their families was not. Daniel let the question disappear beneath the soft clink of silverware, but the photograph stayed in his mind. The man beside Madison's mother had been partly hidden, yet something about him felt painfully familiar. Daniel had seen that same dark wool jacket in an old box of family photographs Rebecca kept after their father died. Still, tonight was already complicated enough. He had promised 20 minutes, not an investigation into the past. We have broken the first rule, Madison said. Daniel glanced at the clock. Which one? No work. We spent 5 minutes discussing an internal facilities report. Technically, you discussed it. I mostly looked concerned. Fair point. The server placed their meals on the table, and Madison looked toward the clock as well. 27 minutes had passed. Neither mentioned leaving. Second rule, Daniel said. No money. Easy, says the billionaire. Madison gave him a patient look. That sounds dangerously close to talking about money. Daniel smiled despite himself. Something had shifted. At headquarters, Madison's silence made entire conference rooms nervous. Here, beneath warm amber light with jazz floating quietly from the bar, her silence felt different. Less like authority, more like someone who had spent too long protecting herself. What about Lucy? Madison asked. What about her? You said she is the most important person in your life. Daniel's expression softened immediately. She is 7. She loves astronomy, hates green beans, and believes pancakes taste better when they look like animals. That last one sounds scientifically reasonable. She would like you. Madison looked surprised. Daniel caught himself. I mean, she would approve of your pancake philosophy. That is less alarming. His phone began ringing. Lucy. Daniel answered immediately. Hey, kiddo. Are you being boring? Lucy asked loudly enough for Madison to hear. Daniel closed his eyes. Rebecca put you up to this. Maybe. You were supposed to be getting ready for bed. Did you meet Maddie? Daniel looked across the table. Madison was trying not to laugh. Yes. Is she nice? She is sitting right here. There was a pause. Then Lucy whispered at full volume. That did not answer me. Madison covered her mouth, laughing. Daniel shook his head. Good night, Lucy. Wait. Ask her if she likes pancakes. Madison leaned toward the phone. Only if they look like animals. Silence. Then Lucy gasped. Dad, do not mess this up. The call ended. Daniel stared at his phone in defeat. Madison laughed again, and this time there was no chief executive officer in the sound, No polished distance, no practiced control. Just a 28-year-old woman enjoying an ordinary moment. Daniel found himself smiling with her. Their meals cooled. 20 minutes became 45. 45 became an hour. They talked about terrible coffee, childhood ambitions, Chicago winters, and the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who only knew one version of you. Daniel never asked about her wealth. Madison never asked what he earned. When the check arrived, both reached for it. Rule 2. Daniel reminded her. No money. This is literally a bill. Exactly. They split it. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalk shining beneath streetlights. Madison pulled her coat tighter against the cold. We broke 2 rules. Daniel nodded. Work and money. 1 remains. No second date. The words hung between them. Daniel looked toward the street, then back at her. Probably the safest one to keep. Madison's smile faded slightly. Probably. He took 2 steps away before she called his name. Daniel. He turned. Madison was holding her phone, the old photograph glowing on the screen. The man you asked about was named Andrew Parker. Daniel stopped. His breath caught. Madison watched recognition cross his face. He was my mother's closest friend for almost 20 years. Daniel stared at her. Andrew Parker was my father. For a moment, neither moved. The city continued around them, headlights passing across wet pavement while a forgotten connection quietly stepped out of the past. Madison looked down at the photograph again. Then I think our friends accidentally arranged a date that our families started long before either of us knew. Daniel barely slept that night. Andrew Parker had been gone for 9 years. Yet one photograph had reopened a door Daniel never knew existed. Rebecca confirmed that their father had known Madison's mother, Evelyn Reed, but she knew little more. Andrew had been private about that chapter of his life, and Daniel had learned long ago that the dead sometimes left questions no amount of love could answer. By Saturday morning, he returned to the life he understood. Lucy wanted blueberry pancakes. The kitchen faucet needed tightening. Laundry waited in 2 baskets. Ordinary things had always been Daniel's safest kind of grace. Then his phone rang. His supervisor sounded apologetic. We have a cooling control fault at headquarters. The weekend technician cannot clear it. Daniel looked at Lucy coloring at the kitchen table. Rebecca was across town and unavailable for another hour. I can be there in 20 minutes, but Lucy has to come with me. Bring her. Security already knows. An hour later, Daniel was kneeling beside an open control panel on the executive floor, while Lucy sat at a nearby conference table with crayons, paper, and strict instructions not to touch anything expensive. Everything looks expensive, she complained. Then touch nothing. Can I touch my crayons? Those cost $4. You are safe. A familiar laugh came from behind him. Daniel turned. Madison stood near the glass doors, dressed casually beneath a light coat, holding a coffee and a folder. I thought chief executive officers did not work Saturdays. I thought facilities engineers avoided this floor. Daniel returned to the control panel. Apparently, we are both making poor decisions this weekend. Lucy looked between them. Are you Maddie? Daniel closed his eyes. Madison smiled. I am. Lucy studied her carefully. You are prettier than Dad said. Lucy. What? You said she looked professional. Madison laughed. I will accept that. While Daniel finished resetting the control system, Madison sat with Lucy. Within minutes, they were discussing planets, pancakes, and whether adults had forgotten how to use crayons properly. Daniel watched from across the room. He expected discomfort. Instead, something quieter unsettled him. Madison did not perform kindness for Lucy. She listened. When Lucy explained why Saturn was better than Jupiter, Madison treated the argument with the seriousness of a board presentation. 20 minutes later, Lucy held up a drawing. 3 figures stood beneath a crooked night sky. Daniel recognized himself immediately. Lucy was beside him. Madison stood on the other side, her yellow crayon hair reaching almost to her shoulders. Beside Madison was an empty space. Who goes there? Madison asked. Lucy shrugged. I did not know if you were staying. The room became still. Daniel lowered his wrench. Madison looked at the drawing longer than necessary. That is fair, she said softly. Lucy returned to coloring, unaware that 7 words had reached somewhere adults spent years protecting. Daniel finished the repair and closed the panel. Ready, kiddo? Lucy nodded, then handed the picture to Madison. You can keep it until you decide. In the elevator, Daniel said nothing. Madison remained upstairs holding the drawing. Only after the doors closed did she notice something Lucy had written in tiny letters beneath Daniel's figure. Grandpa Andrew said good people always come back. Madison stared at the sentence. Andrew had died before Lucy was born. Lucy could only have heard those words from Daniel or Rebecca, but Madison knew them differently. They were the exact words Andrew Parker had written inside the wooden music box he gave Evelyn Reed more than 20 years earlier. Madison crossed her office, opened the box for the first time in years, and removed the velvet tray. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope she had never seen. On the front, in her mother's handwriting, were two names, Madison and Daniel. By Monday morning, Madison had read the names on the envelope at least 20 times, but she had not opened it. The handwriting belonged to her mother. The message, whatever it contained, belonged to Daniel too. That was enough. Some truths deserved patience more than curiosity. She locked the envelope in her desk and walked into the executive conference room at 8:30, where 12 people were already discussing the Horizon Modernization Project, a $40 million upgrade to Reed Technologies' headquarters and 3 regional facilities. Daniel's name appeared on the final staffing slide. Senior Facilities Engineer, Technical Lead. Madison stopped. When was this approved? Operations Vice President Richard Cole looked up. Friday afternoon. Parker scored highest in the technical review. Before Friday evening? Several hours before. What? Madison held his gaze. No reason. Document the approval time. Richard looked confused but nodded. By 10 o'clock, Daniel had heard the news from his supervisor. By 10:15, 2 co-workers had heard about Friday night's restaurant. By lunch, coincidence had become gossip. Daniel entered the break room and the conversation stopped. Marcus gave him an uncomfortable look. Ignore it. Daniel set down his coffee. Ignore what? Marcus hesitated. People are saying you had dinner with Madison Reed Friday night, and Monday morning you get Horizon. Daniel's jaw tightened. The project was assigned before dinner. I know that. Does everyone else? Marcus did not answer. Daniel understood immediately. Reputation could take years to build and minutes to question. At 2 o'clock, he requested a meeting with Madison. Her office felt different now. Lucy's drawing rested beside the window, but the warmth it had carried Saturday seemed far away. Take me off Horizon, Daniel said. Madison stared at him. No. That was quick. Because the answer is obvious. People think I got the position because of you. The review was completed before our dinner. Facts do not move as fast as rumors. Madison stood. You earned that position before you ever sat across from me at dinner. But now nobody will believe it. Silence settled between them. Madison's frustration softened when she saw what was really behind his words. Daniel was not afraid of losing a promotion. He was afraid Lucy might someday hear that her father accepted something he had not earned. I can release the timeline, Madison said. Then it looks like the chief executive officer is defending me personally. So I am supposed to let a lie decide your career? No. You are supposed to let the process speak without you. Madison looked toward Lucy's drawing. And what happens to us? Daniel's expression changed. There is no us. The words came too quickly. Both heard it. Madison nodded once. Right. Daniel regretted them immediately, but before he could correct himself, her desk phone rang. Richard's voice came through the speaker. We have a problem with Horizon. The energy control model failed verification. The numbers submitted Friday do not match the engineering logs. Daniel frowned. Which numbers? Richard paused. The ones carrying your authorization code. Madison looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at her, calm but stunned. I never authorized the final model. The system says you did, Richard replied. Daniel slowly set his coffee on the desk. The rumor had already made him look favored. Now the project carried evidence, making him look responsible. Madison reached for the phone, but Daniel stopped her with one quiet sentence. Do not protect me. She stared at him. Daniel, if I am right, the records will prove it. If I am wrong, I answer for it. He turned toward the door, then paused. I do not need special treatment. I need the same truth you would give anyone else. After he left, Madison opened the locked drawer and looked at the envelope bearing both their names. For the first time, she noticed a second line beneath them, written so faintly she had missed it before. Open only when Daniel chooses his name over our protection. Daniel spent the next morning in a windowless conference room with 3 independent compliance reviewers, his laptop, and 8 months of engineering logs. He did not call Madison. He did not ask Richard Cole for help. He simply followed the trail. Every revision on Horizon carried a timestamp. Every technical approval required 2 credentials. Every authorization left a record somewhere, even when someone hoped nobody would look closely enough to find it. Your code appears here, reviewer Helen Grant said, turning her screen toward him. Sunday at 11:42 in the evening. Daniel studied the entry. I was home with my daughter. Can you prove that? Probably. But that is not the important part. Helen raised an eyebrow. Daniel pointed at the system identifier beneath his name. That authorization came through an executive workstation. Facilities credentials cannot submit from that terminal without an administrative override. The room became quiet. Helen enlarged the log. Daniel was right. By noon, compliance had locked the Horizon records and expanded the review. Madison received only one message: do not intervene. She honored it. That afternoon, Richard entered her office looking pale. This is getting out of control. Madison remained seated. An independent review is not out of control. Daniel could lose his job if the evidence says he should. Richard hesitated. And if it does not? Madison looked up. Then whoever used his name answers for using it. Richard shifted his weight. You understand how this looks. You had dinner with him. People are talking. Which is exactly why I will not touch the investigation. Sometimes leadership requires protecting the company. Madison's voice stayed calm. Truth protects the company. Richard left without answering. Near 5 o'clock, Daniel received a message from Rebecca. Lucy wants to know if you are still coming to her school science night. He looked at the mountain of records. For one dangerous second, work felt more urgent than everything else. Then he remembered the promise he had made after Anna died. Lucy would never have to wonder whether her father was coming home. He closed the laptop. I will return tomorrow morning, he told Helen. My daughter has a cardboard solar system waiting for me. Helen smiled. Go. At 6:30, Daniel walked into Lucy's elementary school carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate and found her standing beside a model of Saturn with one ring hanging crooked. You came. I said I would. Adults say things. Daniel crouched beside her. Then remember the ones who show up. Across town, Madison sat alone in her office with the sealed envelope before her. Open only when Daniel chooses his name over our protection. She finally understood. Daniel had refused her protection twice. First when he asked to leave Horizon, then when he insisted the investigation proceed without her influence. Whatever Evelyn Reed and Andrew Parker had hidden, they had been waiting for exactly this kind of choice. Madison opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages and an old photograph. She read the first paragraph once. Then again, her hands went still. Andrew Parker had not merely been Evelyn's friend. 23 years earlier, when Reed Technologies was a failing 6-person company operating from a rented warehouse, Andrew had designed the energy control architecture that became the foundation of its first profitable commercial system. He had refused ownership, refused public credit, and asked Evelyn for only one promise. If his children ever worked for Reed, they would earn their place without knowing what he had done. Madison turned to the final page. One sentence was underlined in Evelyn's handwriting. Never promote Daniel because of his father. Never protect him because of me. Let his character introduce him before our history does. Madison slowly lowered the letter. The mystery of why Daniel's name had always felt strangely familiar was finally answered. But beneath the photograph was one more document, folded separately and marked with a date only 6 months earlier. Evelyn had been gone for 3 years. Someone else had placed it there. Madison unfolded it and recognized Richard Cole's signature. By 9 the next morning, the executive conference room felt colder than usual. Madison sat at one end of the long table, while Richard Cole sat 6 seats away, his expression carefully neutral. Daniel was not beside her. He had insisted on remaining with the independent compliance team until they finished their review, and Madison respected that boundary even now. Helen Grant entered carrying a sealed report. The investigation is complete. No one moved. Helen connected her laptop to the display. Daniel Parker did not authorize the disputed Horizon model. Richard leaned forward. Then how did his credentials appear? Helen changed the screen. His identification was attached through an administrative override from Executive Workstation 17. The next slide displayed the access record. Richard's face changed. Madison said nothing. Helen continued. That workstation was assigned to the Office of Operations. Three directors looked toward Richard. This proves a terminal was used, Richard said. Not who used it. Correct, Helen replied. So we checked secure access records. Your executive badge entered that office at 11:37 Sunday night. The authorization was submitted 5 minutes later. Silence spread across the room. Richard looked at Madison. There is context. Then give it, she said. His voice tightened. Horizon was falling behind. Parker challenged the model. I believed his objections were overly cautious. I approved the revision and used his authorization because his technical sign-off was required. You used his name because he refused to approve something he believed was wrong, Helen said. Richard looked down. Madison placed the document she had found in her mother's envelope on the table. And 6 months ago, you signed this. Richard froze. It was a memorandum acknowledging that Andrew Parker had contributed foundational engineering work to the early company and that Daniel was never to receive preferential treatment because of it. Richard had known exactly whose son Daniel was. You knew his history, Madison said. You also knew I had recently reviewed his performance record. When rumors started after Friday night, you assumed nobody would defend him without making those rumors worse. Richard did not answer. He did not need to. Daniel entered only after compliance invited him in. His work jacket looked almost out of place among tailored suits, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity he brought to every mechanical room in the building. Helen summarized the findings. Daniel listened without satisfaction. No smile. No victory. Just relief that the truth no longer needed his voice to survive. Madison turned to the board. There is one more matter. Daniel's Horizon appointment was approved Friday at 4:12 in the afternoon. Our dinner reservation began at 7:30. The timestamp appeared on the screen. His technical score ranked first before either of us knew we were meeting that evening. Nobody spoke. The people who had whispered about favoritism now had nothing left to whisper about. Daniel looked at Madison, and she understood that this silence mattered more than applause. Richard was placed on administrative leave pending formal review, and Madison ordered an audit of the authorization process so no employee's credentials could be used that way again. She did not celebrate punishment. Justice was not revenge. It was correction. When the room emptied, Madison handed Daniel Evelyn's letter. He read the passage about Andrew slowly. My father helped build this company, more than either of us knew. Daniel folded the letter carefully. And you knew this before the meeting? Since last night. But you said nothing. Madison met his eyes. Your mother and my father asked me not to let history speak before your character did. Daniel's expression shifted. My father. Madison blinked. Yes, your father. He gave a tired smile. You said mother. For the first time all morning, Madison laughed softly. Apparently, even chief executive officers get nervous. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then the warmth disappeared from his face. Madison, we still cannot do this. Do what? Pretend the company will forget because the truth came out. He glanced toward the empty boardroom. Lucy deserves a father who does not hide the people he cares about. And you deserve someone who can stand beside you without everyone questioning why. Madison swallowed. So this is goodbye? Daniel shook his head. No, it is me refusing to make something good live in the shadows. He walked away before she could answer. On the table between them remained Andrew's letter and Lucy's drawing. Madison looked at the empty space Lucy had left beside her figure and finally understood it. Staying was not about wanting a place in someone's life. Sometimes dignity required waiting until you could enter it the right way. 3 months passed before Madison saw Daniel outside Reed Technologies again. The company had changed more than either expected. The Horizon authorization system had been rebuilt. Richard Cole had left after the formal review, and Daniel had accepted a newly created technical leadership role reporting through an independent engineering division rather than Madison's executive chain. He had earned it through a competitive review, documented so thoroughly that even Daniel finally stopped arguing with the result. Madison never interfered. She kept her distance, answered only necessary work messages, and allowed something she wanted to exist without using power to pull it closer. Then, on a cold Friday evening, her phone displayed a restaurant reservation she had never made. 7:30. Same restaurant. Same corner table. The sender was hidden. Madison almost called Jenna. Instead, she smiled and reached for her coat. When she arrived, Daniel was already there. Dark brown hair neatly combed, jacket folded across the chair beside him. nervousness visible beneath the calm expression he wore when fixing everything else in life. Madison stopped beside the table. Please tell me Jenna did not arrange this. Daniel stood. She wanted to. Rebecca also wanted to. Lucy. Daniel considered the question. Management. Madison laughed and sat down. On her plate rested a handmade card in purple crayon. No more blind dates. Madison touched the uneven letters. She has strong opinions. You have no idea. So what is this? Daniel looked around the softly lit room. A choice. No company titles. No accidental matching. No rumors deciding what either of them deserved. Just two people who had spent months learning that respect was not the obstacle to love. It was the foundation. Madison leaned back. Do we have rules? One. Only one. No pretending we do not know what we want. Her expression softened. That sounds dangerous. Lucy approved it. Then clearly it has passed legal review. Dinner lasted 2 hours. They talked about Lucy's science fair, Madison's plan to establish an engineering ethics scholarship, and Andrew Parker's forgotten contribution to the company. Daniel had finally told Lucy about her grandfather. Madison had placed Andrew's photograph beside Evelyn's in her office. Two families that had quietly shaped each other decades earlier were no longer hidden behind unanswered questions. When dessert arrived, Madison noticed Daniel watching the old wooden music box she had brought with her. Why did you bring that? She asked. Because Rebecca found something. Daniel turned the box over. Inside the base was a narrow compartment Madison had never noticed. He opened it and removed a folded note. She found this in one of Dad's storage boxes. Instructions for the compartment. Madison unfolded the paper. The handwriting belonged to Andrew. Evelyn, if our children ever meet, please do not arrange anything. Let life have one surprise we did not engineer. Madison laughed softly. So they did not plan this. Apparently, they specifically requested the opposite. She read the final line and stopped smiling. Daniel noticed. What? Madison handed him the note. Beneath Andrew's message was a second sentence, written years later in Evelyn's handwriting. Andrew, I kept my promise. But if Daniel ever finds his way to Madison, give him the other key. Daniel stared at the words. What other key? Madison looked at the music box. Lucy's card had been placed beneath it. Daniel lifted the card, and something small slid onto the table. A brass key. Taped beneath it was a note in Rebecca's handwriting. Lucy found this inside Grandpa's old telescope case. Madison looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the key. Neither spoke. The server passed their table without interrupting. Later that evening, they used the key on a locked drawer in Andrew's old desk at Rebecca's house. Inside was not money, stock, or another corporate secret. There was one photograph. Andrew Parker and Evelyn Reed stood outside the same Chicago restaurant nearly 30 years earlier, laughing beneath its old sign. On the back, Andrew had written one sentence. First date, 7:30. Daniel stared at Madison. They came here. Madison turned the photograph over again, stunned. Their friends had chosen the restaurant randomly from an online list. Their parents had never arranged the blind date. Nobody had planned the coincidence. Yet decades apart, two generations had somehow chosen the same place, at the same time. For a beginning neither could predict. Daniel smiled and offered Madison his hand. You asked what part of tonight was mine. She slipped her hand into his. Showing up? No. He looked at her with the quiet certainty of a man who had finally stopped running from second chances. Staying. And for once, Madison Reed did not need to know where the road would lead before choosing to walk it with him.